very glad to announce that that Professor Ashok Aklujkar has joined us, and thank you, Ashokji. So, Professor Ashok Aklujkar, so he is my mentor. Tom was my friend. Tom knew. Tom was a scholar. Tom guided me into Sanskrit. As a matter of fact, I thought if a person who is not born in India knows so much about India, how is that I, I'm a person of India, would not know? So that was my motivation to understand. And then I came to know about Ashok Aklujkar later, when I thought I will do a little documentary on Sanskrit, and which is not complete yet, still running. We are still making efforts. But he's a great man. Great man because not many people have analytic minds. Many people have descriptive minds. They categorize, classify. They put things into bins. They say this what happened, that happened. But Ashok Aklujkar did work to understand why it happened. Not that you will agree with him, everything that he has done, but I've not seen many writings from India or Indian scholars who would analyze. I will let him speak a few words if he wants to. And after he does, we will read some material from one of his essays, and then we will go through a small discussion. Ashok, you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Vijay. I really did not appear here to say something from my own writings or from my own conclusions about certain things. I wanted to see old friends. That's one thing. And secondly, it was because my wife Vidyut
yes,
told me about
morning,
it.
Vidyutji.
I work primarily on Bhratṛhari, the grammarian philosopher. And at the time Vijay mentions, I was immersed in Bhratṛhari. I started reading Bhratṛhari in 1963, 64. And then gradually I realized that the author I was studying was very difficult to handle for practical reasons as well as my limitations. Bhratṛhari is, as I mentioned, a grammarian philosopher, and my field was primarily grammar. So turning to philosophy was something unfamiliar to me. Still, I was known for jumping into things that are unfamiliar and then swimming until I overcame the feeling of being drowned. Harvard Library was not very well equipped to handle Bhratṛhari, but it was better than most. And my professor guide, Professor Daniel H.H. Ingalls, was a very good man for the subject because he also did not know much about Bhratṛhari. And so he welcomed my study. He said, Ashok, good, you're jumping into it, but don't count on me for guiding you. So I said, okay, I will do my best to understand Bhratṛhari on my own. And then, as was my practice in those days, I would read a book from end to end and try for whatever was mentioned but was not available in the library. So I did not really feel drowned. I had very good teachers in India to whom I'm always grateful. And those two teachers were almost exact opposites of Daniel Ingalls. They did not believe in anything that Western scholars had written, and especially they wanted persons like me, who was primarily a Sanskritist, to interpret an author on his own. So I made many recitations of Bhratṛhari, and Ingalls was quite satisfied with that. He encouraged me to do a textual study, to do a all interpretive study, and try on my own whatever I felt like. So I understood Bhratṛhari a great deal simply because there was no one else struggling with me. And so I was uninfluenced by other earlier scholars. So my guides were mainly books from 1880s and so on. So I was closer to scholars in Banaras than to any scholars in MIT or Harvard. At that time, Paul Kiparsky was also getting interested in Sanskrit grammar, but he was mostly on the prakriya side of Sanskrit grammar, how grammarians handled naughty questions of Sanskrit as a language. And Paul was a young person at that time. He was unexperienced, or inexperienced, should I say, that other scholars were not really known to him. So at that time, he struggled with text, and my interpretation of text was, of course, much easier than his, because I came from the tradition to some extent. But it was also difficult because I was dealing with two extremes of the Indological field at that time. One was Ingalls, who always believed that the tradition had been lost in India, and therefore each of us had to struggle and reinvent it from the text that actually survived. And then the other extreme was interpreting Bhratṛhari in the light of what commentators in MIT and Harvard were struggling with. At that time, I was introduced to MIT because there were 2 or 3 people who did not know much Sanskrit, but who were not afraid to handle it. One was Roman Jakobson, and he was an independent linguist, anthropologist, and what have you. So Roman Jakobson was one of my teachers, in the sense that I was never officially registered in any of his courses, but I used to attend all his lectures at MIT and at Harvard. And he was disorganized in many ways, but he was daring, and he was always telling me, Ashok, this is what Bhratṛhari says in such a book. And I would say, Professor Jakobson, that's not what the Sanskrit means. So we had excellent conversations, and Jakobson's free spirit was really what I wanted to study in depth. So this is how I was riding 2 horses at the same time, the horse of MIT scholars and the horse of tradition scholars. And I got more and more interested. I was not afraid to handle the international dimension of Bhratṛhari studies, but I was not very familiar with it either. I knew most of the text by heart. I knew how to handle with different problems in terms of linguistic philosophy and in terms of several other issues such as textual interpretation. And so I started with a textual study of Bhratṛhari. And I wanted to be sure about the exact text and know about all the problems that had bothered scholars. And that was really a hard beginning for me, but it was also most rewarding, because every time I could be sure about what the author had actually written. And Ingalls was very good in that respect. He would always question me, he would always put me on the spot, and he would say, but how do you interpret this particular thing? And then he said, Ashok, with your preparation, no one is going to pay much attention to what you are saying if you are not textually sound. I said, I'm very sound about my textual interpretation. I haven't done much textual criticism such as such. I haven't such and such part of Bhratṛhari, but I'm sure I can do it. And so this is how I began to grapple with the text and found some very interesting things. And my earlier writings, Ingalls then said, you should publish this. In my readings, as well as in the authors you mentioned, there is no one who holds such a view. And the textual view of such and such part of the commentators, Vrishabha, Hela Raja, Punya Raja, is very remarkable. And once you can really establish the text, you can do wonderful things. So I became from a very wide-ranging scholar of the traditional authors to a very narrowly focused scholar. And then I began to appreciate the wordings of, appreciate the works of Hela Raja and Punya Raja and so on. And I began to respect them more. That is, the traditional scholars were working under very difficult circumstances. They didn't have Xeroxing, which was becoming very popular in my student days at Harvard. And then I was also paying attention to each particle of a sentence and collecting all the passages that pertain to the same particular point. And so I began to enjoy that subtlety of interpretation. And I was especially impressed by Hela Raja, who was fortunately the only traditional scholar living in 10th century Kashmir, who paid attention to all the details and who was saying, this is what scholars need to say, but haven't actually said, and so on. So it was an interesting development for me. And I then spent years and years or pages of books, of manuscripts and so on, that were not handled or not were known to scholars. So it was very interesting, and I then knew where to focus my thesis, PhD thesis, and I enjoyed the process because everything was challenging, and that's what my one thing that I had brought from India with me was the spirit to challenge things, and challenge only not your others but yourself, and not be afraid to say that yes, I wrote that 10 years ago, but that's where I had gone wrong. And Ingalls was not afraid to have a thesis or have a student who was going to submit a work in which lot of problems were pointed out. So this is how the whole process I enjoyed. The only difficulty was I had a fellowship for only 4 years, and in 4 years to study all these things was very challenging. But I did it, and Ingalls was appreciative of the challenge, as well as my willingness to tackle different things. So I didn't see him every day or anything like that, but I did see him when he asked me to undertake the teaching of a course that he was going to be, he would like to have offered at Harvard. And so those were the 4 years of my most enjoyable growth, most challenging as well as enjoyable growth as a student. Sorry for taking such a long time. And I will just recite one verse that Thomas Burke did not really handle in my presence. I didn't even, in fact, know him as a student at Harvard. Anyway, and so my wife now, Vidyut, she points out that I should.
Okay, recite.
She should recite. Or was that?
Okay.
That
Hello.
really had influenced me, although I didn't know that I was influenced by him.
Okay, I will just say a couple of verses from Gita in honor of the gentle spirit for which we have gathered here, Thomas Burke. So, न जायते म्रियते वा कदाचित् नायं भूत्वा भविता वा न भूयः अजो नित्यः शाश्वतोऽयं पुराण न हन्यते हन्यमाने शरीरे वासांसि जीर्णानि यथा विहाय नवानि गृह्णाति नरोपराणि तथा शरीराणि विहाय जीर्णान्यन्यानि संयाति नवानि देहि. Namo Namaha.
Okay, what we'll do is, I think, honoring this couple. By the way, they visited Harvard in 2001, I think. That's where I first met them. Vidyutji also is a Sanskrit scholar. She teaches. So what you have thought that we will appreciate his writings by reading a section from a long essay he wrote. I will advise you all to read that essay, the long essay, 100 pages, but on reality, developed from writings. Different people read the Vedas. Some people think the Vedas are given by God. Some people think Vedas have to be obeyed. Some people think that whatever way the sounds are, they give you health, happiness, prosperity. Some people think so they are the rules of nature. So amongst all this, one has to decipher where do we go? What does the common man should know? Analysis of it. It's a beautiful paper. From that paper, this section 5 of it, which is somehow concluding remarks, our friend, Mr. Ramapriya, will read. And if we have time, we might discuss a bit. A professor will also make comment on it. But listen very carefully and see how he proceeds in the analysis of. It is not Christian analysis, not Buddhist analysis, not Jain analysis, it's not Hindu analysis. It is textual analysis. How the words are used and how we can go dive through to find out what the author might mean and what reality. So I admire the scientific spirit in Ashokji in doing this analysis, and let us listen to my friend Ramapriya. Ramapriya, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'm ready.
Please.
Namaste, everybody.
This comes from a book called Bhratṛhari, The Reality. It's a 2009 book. Consists of about 20 articles or so. And this is the first article. And I will share the book if anybody wants. Okay, proceed.
Yeah, this article is titled Larger Significance of the Attempted Reconstruction. Philologically, our exploration has led to a Veda Revelation view or theory that is textually supported, does not take undue liberties with the meanings of words, and connects Bhratṛhari's thinking in one part of his works with the thinking in other parts. Beyond these features, which are required by the very theme of the essay, the exploration has, in the last few sections, suggested how Bhratṛhari achieves an impressive economy of theory and gives a very defensible explanation of Veda Apaurusheyatva with his Veda Revelation account. In my statements, there also has been a suggestion that the account may be philosophical, not just an expression of faith. Given our present acculturation, our first reaction can expectedly be to see mythology or the realm of the irrational and untestable in texts speaking of scriptures. Persons with extraordinary capabilities, dreamlike experiences in which the distinction between seeing and hearing is effaced, and the beginning of the world from a supra-mundane entity culminating in a merger with the same entity. Such a reaction can even have a tone of conviction when we come across a text that speaks of all these entities and ideas cumulatively, appealing to a source similar to the Puranas and claiming for its scripture and scriptural language the status of the mother of all scriptures and languages. However, our exploration has resulted in the finding that there is an empirical spirit too in what Bhratṛhari has written. He speaks of Shastra as simply informing us about the properties of things, not as investing things with properties. His seers parallel the physical scientists to the extent they uncover what is hidden and unknown to ordinary people. The activity that primarily sets them apart is that they connect their discoveries with words in certain received texts, and they see in some of these words the potential to activate the properties. As the words are sounds of or vibrations, the distinctive activity becomes one in which the focus is on the relationship between two physical entities, produced vibrations, and the properties of things. There is nothing exclusively or primarily appealing to faith in this feature either. Could it therefore be the case that Veda Apaurusheyatva and the revelation account associated with it or at bottom, inspired by a desire to solve or block some basic principle in epistemology. Could the myths, nurtured by a tradition that enjoyed riddles and put different spins on the essentially same message, be disguised philosophically? What is involved in the further consideration suggested by the question just asked is willingness to concede the possibility that what we call rationality could have preceded our reconstructed frame of Veda revelation. In particular, the possibility that the passages under consideration could be indicative of a point in theorization at which a reference to something beyond the terms and axioms accepted in the investigation was felt to be necessary. The interpretation of the passages justified above on independent grounds suggests an investigative spirit in the midst of a mysterious sounding or myth-like talk. The passages make a clear reference to things and properties, express concern with the question of how the properties can be known reliably and how we can be sure that they are known reliably, and allude to the importance of understanding the nature and role of language properly. The texts we have studied cannot be viewed as totally lacking interest in analyzing the material or empirical world which we associate with science, or as being entirely innocent of the problem of understanding the human thought process with which is associated the issue of rational thinking. One is free to consider the text's engagement with science or rational thinking as elementary or primitive until evidence to the contrary emerges. But one can certainly not be justified in brushing them aside as nothing but the writings of credulous persons brought up in a tradition dominated by mystical religious teachings. The plausibility of a non-mystic interpretation can be argued for one in one more way. The word dharma conveys three meanings in Bhratṛhari's writings. A. Norm, what an individual person is expected to do, or what the Shastra or Agama advises one to do. B. A positive and unseen, that is, non-mundane effect generated by sticking to a norm. And C. An attribute, property, or quality. One may view the relationship between meanings A and B in one of the following two ways. Because the Shastra knows that the effect spoken of in B is good for human beings, it advises the way it does, or because the Shastra advises something, one's following of that advice must produce a positive effect for oneself. Either way, there will be appeal to trust or faith and arbitrary blocking of further logical inquiry. The second kind of relationship, namely the investing of an action with capability to produce a beneficial effect because of a Shastra statement, also presupposes that the Shastra knows what is good. In other words, both alternatives end up in an unquestioned or uncritical acceptance of the Shastra. They stand in need of giving people the tools that can help in determining which Shastra is good for them. The discussant faces the question, why should one empower the Shastra in the first place? What need is there for Shastra? Why should one not stop just with the advice of rationality, empiricism, etc.? But experience and logical considerations themselves establish that one cannot stop at rationality, empiricism, etc., and that it is a misconception that there is something called pure rationalism or total objectivity. So, one cannot do without the Shastra, and one cannot accept it simply as an article of faith. What can one do when faced with this dilemma? Bhratṛhari's solution can be said to consist of 4 steps. A. Reject the propositions implicit in the preceding statements that knowledge has a beginning at some point and that all circularities can be avoided. Instead of postulating that either the human beings get their knowledge from the Shastras or the Shastras are invested with the knowledge by human beings, postulate that an interplay, a give and take between the Shastras and human beings has been going on all the time. That is, without any temporal beginning as such. The Shastras have been advising human beings about what is good for them from time immemorial, and human beings, following the Shastra advice, have been discovering truths to add to the Shastras also from time immemorial. B. Imagine a theoretical source or beginning for each statement. Veda for the Shastras and Rishis for the human beings. C. Think of these sources as coexisting right from the beginning of creation, regardless of whether any real creation took place or not. Point D. Go beyond the languages of investing with properties. Neither the Shastras nor human beings do that. Accept the physical world in itself or in the way it comes to us as consisting of things that have certain properties. Here, a thought system's incompleteness or ultimately not being absolutely autonomous comes to the surface. By the very nature of things, such a system needs unquestioned acceptance of something. The contradiction between starting with insistence on proof of everything and ending up with unproved acceptance of something comes across as inevitable.
Okay. Can we all thank Ramapriya? Can you unmute yourself?
Thank you.
And So
I mean,
Ramapriya,
basically, all this is Professor Aklujkar's.
right. But you
I'm
read
only a voice.
you read it clearly. I think it's okay. And a short recruitment. Um, Professor is still there. So people heard it, see the whole mosaic of material, that reality. What happens is we just went through Catholic Pope selection. So this whole system, that there's an order, the order has to be followed because the order is empirical and people have followed before. So that becomes truth. The question is, what is the human being? So Bhratṛhari, I think one of the brilliant minds of the, I think, last 1,000 years, 2,000 years, analyzes this. And again, why I bring this up and bring Ashokji is Tom Burke introduced me to Bhratṛhari and to see where does the truth lie. And I struggled through material. I struggled through Ashokji's book. And I then come to my own conviction that the truth lies inside of us. But I'm trying to do a mathematical model of it, that it is the brain which is eventually the truth. It is not what we say, but what we perceive. So let Ashokji comment on his own paper if he can, and then we can ask him few questions. I think imagine this is a privilege. It's a privilege that the author is right with us. I think this kind of authorship, which has happened through the theological literature over the years. I was doing lectures in Harvard, then somebody will call me, a very senior person, and he's a theologian himself, and he will ask me that what is Indian theology? So that discovery, what is Indian theology? Why should there be a theology? Is there a father? So let Ashokji take care of it, and let him educate us.
Well, I have spent a great deal of time in
Yes.
writing a simple account. And I avoided words like theology and others. If there are any questions that a simple mind like mine can answer, I would like to do that. But to answer specific questions, which are
anybody has a question?
Gigantic
Paul, Peter, Bala studied, or Prem. Prem has some kind of Bhratṛhari presentation he is trying to do today.
Listen to that.
Or Ramapriya, when you read, anything came up?
No.
No?
No.
Don't be shy. I think it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to understand.
I mean, basically, one question that I could have is, how did the idea that the Vedas are Apaurisheya really came up? I mean, we understand the entire Vedas took over 1,000 or 1,500 years to be composed. If that is the scope of that, or in that big gap of time, how could anybody say that it is Apaurisheya other than saying that it is composed by people?
The word Apaurisheya has troubled Indian thinkers also. We need not imagine that we are the first ones to face the question. The Mimamsakas, and Bhratṛhari was also a Mimamsaka, not just a grammarian or a thinker as such. but he was, the Mimamsakas have come up with Apaurusheya as a proper explanation of a great deal of unsolved problems in human thinking in general. The particular problem I was constrained by at the time I wrote my thesis was that the Apaurusheya thinking is very difficult to grasp. It's probably partly because the Mimamsa works that shaped Apaurusheya, that discussed Apaurusheya as a very widespread but rewarding theory, are no longer available to us. And so, first to understand what Bhratṛhari presupposed and what he could not have presupposed is a very difficult question. Second thing is the answer is dissatisfying, is not likely to satisfy any critical thinker. They're saying, we asked you for a specific answer, very well-defined set of ideas, and you are telling us that there is no such thing as such a complex of ideas as a thinker that will answer all the questions. I had a third difficulty that was of a very temporal nature. In my days at Harvard, the philosophers in the philosophy department and other departments, linguistics department, were approaching this sort of reaction, but they are not expressly saying this. And outside of the departments, philosophy departments, this kind of answer would have been saying, would be questioned, very daring answer, and said, if you have this answer that the questions are too nebulous, the questions are too ill-defined, the questions are unsolvable, then what are you doing here? Why are you taking public's money and ultimately telling us there is no answer? We need to change our entire setup of thinking. This would have been very difficult for people who are employed and who earn their salaries and who teach the things. And then the answer would have been considered, you are really advocating, along with Bhratṛhari, anarchy of some sort. And Hilary Putnam, Willard Van Orman Quine, they were actually coming close to that when I, as a student who could see them practically every other day, I would have encouraged them to think along these lines. But they would say to me, Ashok, I'm not advocating such an anarchy, and the world is not ready for it, or I'm not ready for it because I'm not really difficult to. I'm not advanced enough to do this, or I'm not too disassociated from the history of Western philosophy and Indian philosophy to advocate this sort of an answer without any hesitation. So think of me as undecided. Think of me as not really advanced enough, or having too much burden of current philosophy, of history of Western philosophy on our minds. So we are not daring enough. That's how they would indicate in different ways. And you can see in their various writings, especially one or two short papers where Putnam would come to advocate a kind of indecisiveness, kind of saying we can proceed in this way or we can proceed in that way, but don't ask me for a definite answer, that kind of thing. So that would have been the problem faced by them and me also. And for me especially, it was problematic because I was a student. I had no voice or authority as such in either tradition. And so, and the Indian philosophical tradition was already characterized by most of the scholars of Western philosophy by saying they are too nebulous, too mystical, they refuse to give a clear-cut answer. And so therefore, in the end of myself as a student. So they were not actually coming out and saying that, but that's what was the ultimate result, quite distinctly possible in my days. So I was not ready, and I was, first of all, I was not a student of philosophy in a legal sense, and I was not I come from a traditional Indian school. So this kind of restricted answer and sort of avoiding the responsibility to come up with a simple answer that would satisfy modern students of philosophy or students of philosophy at Harvard and so on, was not possible. This is exactly the kind of limitation, the kind of clarity coming at the expense of a different way of looking at philosophy was something I could feel, but I could not express myself. I had not written anything in English up to that point. I was much more comfortable in writing in Sanskrit than in writing in English. So there were several personal reasons, several institutional reasons. There were several reasons for having to do with the world of thought in general, without limitations of the philosophy of this country or this province or so on. So these were the limitations which were exactly my constraining things, and I had to get a degree and way out of it. So that is one thing you have to understand. This is not something I was prepared to do at that time. I had come to Harvard with a 4-year scholarship, and to ask for any extension, for write something absolutely revolutionary was possible only after I had established myself in the field somehow. So I can do now articulate the implications of what Bhratṛhari says or what I say, but I could not present them as my philosophical PhD thesis. So that's really a practical difficulty in those days. It still exists now, but now I can say I'm a retired professor now. So it was possible, but not doable at that time, and it was wise in one sense. It would have been a good shock to the established Western philosophy and Indian philosophy, but it was still not rewarding enough for me in a worldly way. And call me now, coming to this, the point on apaurushayatva, why he speaks of apaurushayatva or apaurushayatva, or why anybody speaks of apaurushayatva. This is the deepest root, and it's still there in reception of Indian philosophy. precisely because India did not have a philosophical tradition that depended on jobs, on departments, on a free-thinking society in the best possible practical way. It could not articulate the kind of conclusion I'm trying to express right now. We're just struggling to express. Really, I'm not even trying the best way possible. So, from the part of my work that has been read here, I would have tended to offer such an answer. Can be said. Aklujkar was trying to approach this, but he then wrote a thesis that was philosophically sound, that was philologically sound. And Paurushetva is a victim of such restrictions on in our educational life, in our constraints on what philosophy is supposed to be. And so this is what I got clearly from Quine. Quine was saying, I said, most of the things you say would imply some kind of apaurusheta or some kind of freedom for thinkers to say all these things. He said, yes, but don't say it. So, this is how you have to understand this in that particular context, in that cultural ethos or intellectual ethos. Okay, so I don't think I'm making much sense, but please ask me specific questions. And
Ashokji, I have one very small question. Bhratṛhari's act of speech, this para pashyanti madhyama vaikhari. I mean, these are mechanics of, the flow of speech coming out of the mouth. But how the words are chosen or created mentally and then channeled through mouth. That aspect, is there anything which Bhratṛhari has talked about?
Yes, toward the last section of the first book of Bhratṛhari, Vakyapadiya, there is one karika, one verse. Karika is a philosophical verse. So that you have, and that says there he gives lists of how this happens and so on. I don't have the book with me right now, otherwise to give you exact reference, but I'll send it to you if you want. Just please drop me a reminder.
Sure.
And this was in Kashmir Shaivism. This particular question began to bother them also. So in Kashmir Shaivism, this karika is cited frequently, and then also Shabdasya Parinamo Yamityamnaya Vido Vidu. That's one line of that karika, one part of that karika. And there the mechanics, the practical aspect, philosophical aspect of, not philosophical, practical mostly. How does one express how does thought become words? How that has been touched upon. But precisely that's the topic Bhratṛhari writes very little about. In other parts of the Vakyapadiya, he is mainly concerned with philosophy, probably. That's what.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll let kind of a can you all applaud Professor Aklujkar for this number one, for the appearance, number two, for a long contribution to our own education, and number three, for blessing us So this effort of Thomas Burke and so on is like a fluke effort. We are trying to see how people think, open-ended. And I found him one of those open-ended thinkers. That is, can we make sense out of this multiplicity of material that we see, and do they make sense? I will say, if possible, he may show up again tomorrow if he has time. We have 1 more hour today. We have 2 papers that we will present, one by Kushagra Aniket and one by Prem Nagar. Both are interesting papers. So he may carry on. It's been another 45 minutes or so. And then if he blesses, we can do a little more analysis tomorrow. We have this paper of theory of mind coming from India, a clinical study. So that will happen maybe tomorrow about say 11:30 or so. So we shall see whether we can expand the discussion a little further. So again, why not we, I'm not going to